Okay, tonight we're going to do landlord-tenant relationship. And this is always a hot topic because I always have people in here that have issues with their landlord. It never fails. I don't know why it is that people just have issues with their landlords, but they do. So we'll talk about that. I want to step back for just a minute. One of the questions on Chapter 7, though, at the very end, a lot of you, that last question, Chapter 7 text answer.
Yes, that was terrible. What was it?
It's not, Chapter 7 text answer is not real bad, but it asked you questions about changing the law today for landlord-tenant law.
Yeah, I didn't understand it. And I tried to go read back, and I thought I moved something. Yeah.
Okay, so the question was, describe and discuss those rules of landlord-tenant law that no longer seem appropriate given present-day expectations of lay parties. What are lay parties? When we talk about lay people are people that are in the business, not in the industry. Okay, so when we, today, let's say you've never had experience and you go in and you rent an apartment, what are the kinds of things you expect, from a lease that, you expect to see there that may be written differently? And this goes back over time. A long time ago, I was telling her, rents weren't always collected and due the very first of the month. We'd like to be able to collect them and do the first of the month, but years ago, rents just were kind of due that month. And today, we pay rent at the beginning of the month, so the landlord has the rent money to pay the bills during the month while you're there, is ultimately what it comes down to. But we write today more the lease rent is due at the beginning of the month. If it's not paid by the 5th of the month, there's a late fee. We see that more common today, but that wasn't always the way. Another thing that we were talking about before was, and I just drew a blank here for you, how you pay your rent. We used to collect the rent at the rental, literally at the rental office, and sometimes people would pay cash. And many years ago, if you were a landlord and people paid cash, you would maybe carry concealed because you were literally taking cash to the bank all the time, or two of you went to the bank all the time. Today, we don't let people pay in cash. People, it's like, what's cash? We also tell them we don't want to collect rent at the office. We want rent to go to a lockbox because most people are using lockbox processing. So one of the things we might do in a lease is say the rent has to be paid through this lockbox. And I'm having troubles today right now. I had 4 tenants that paid last month at one of my properties, and all of a sudden I've got 4 tenants. Where's your September rent? Now we're researching back. The lockbox didn't process the checks right. I got canceled checks, but they didn't process them right. So now we got to chase them down. But those are things to make the practice current is what we're looking at. So that would be, again, if you saw a lease, you'd have to know it inside and out to say this is where it is. And maybe that was kind of a tough question, but make you think. Make you think is what we're trying to do.
Lay parties again?
Lay parties are people that aren't doing the business today. Okay, so if you're not in the medical industry and you're going as a patient, you're a lay person, unless you're actually a doctor or nurse. Going into a law office, you're a lay person unless you're an attorney or paralegal. So a lay person is somebody that's not practiced. It's the general public coming in. Okay, so landlord, this is what we talked about. Rent paid in advance. No more requirement for modern leases. Rent payments are due prior to the beginning of the lease period. However, we say lease is due at the 1st of the month. If it's not paid by the 5th or the 6th of the month, there's a late fee. That's very common. A lot of times people don't enforce late fees. A lot of times people go overhanded and enforce late fees. And you need to be real careful how you read your late fees, because some late fees are late fees on top of late fees on top of late fees, and it's almost impossible to get out from under it. It becomes like a bad loan. You can keep paying for a long time. Security deposit. Money deposited by a tenant for security to the landlord, usually at the inception of the lease, over and above the advance payment of rent. Last night we talked a little bit about what should be a standard security deposit. In our market, we've always said it's 1 month's rent. It's not the wisest thing. Security deposit should be the actual damages. So if your rent is $800 a month, but as a landlord, you're operating and you really only ever seeing $400 or $500 a month damages, make your security deposit your damages. When you make your security deposit a full month's rent, you're inviting your tenants to leave without paying their last month's rent. All the leases say you're not supposed to use this as a security deposit, But it's very seldom that the landlord's going to go to court. It's not worth their time to collect that last month's rent. So they've lost their money to recover damages if they make it last month's rent and the tenant leaves.
Wouldn't the landlord also want that in case the tenant doesn't give 1 month's notice, something like that?
We are a state that is a 30-day notice law. 30-day notice. I'll give you 30 days. I'm going to leave. You give me 30 days. Security deposit, yeah, that's the same kind of thing. But if they keep the security deposit as the last month's rent because the tenant didn't give notice, it's really not the same as security deposit for damage. But they would have to write a letter informing them in writing, I'm keeping your last month's rent because you didn't give me the full 30 days notice.
Right.
Keeping
But
security
it would kind
deposit.
of be a protection.
Yeah,
for
more than anything, security deposit is meant to cover damages. Now, if a tenant left and they didn't give me full 30 days notice and I wasn't able to collect the rent, yeah, I might consider going to court to make sure I got everything. But a lot of times, though, from a practical standpoint, to go collect $800 for an owner of property to pay an attorney or to go to court, take the time off work and everything, they don't end up making money. It's a break-even proposition. It's not worth their time. Third-person guarantee of rent. The landlord who has doubts about the capacity or reliability of the tenant meeting conditions of the lease may require a third person to guarantee performance. We see third-person guarantee performance a lot of time in college, where we ask the parents to guarantee the student's lease, especially if the student is a minor. Then the minor can't enter into the lease anyway. It has to be an adult. But when my kid and his friends were trying to rent a house, I wouldn't guarantee the lease. One of the 5 said they would. We all said, we're nuts. Nobody wanted to go into financial problems to pay rent on a house that was what it was. But it's like guaranteeing a car payment. You know, if you're going to sign for your friend, you're signing for your friend, and if they don't pay the rent, the landlord's going to come back after you. It's co-signing, exactly. Third-person guarantee of rent. We ask for guarantees of rent in our commercial leases very often because we have LLCs that are holding the business, and we may ask for a personal guarantee of rent in case the LLC goes out of business. Then we can come back after that person. A personal guarantee means we can come back after their house, their estate, whatever is their personal property. So we're going back a little stronger asking for that guarantee of rent. And a commercial contract is pretty big dollars sometimes. Lessor has the covenant of quiet enjoyment. It's a warranty by the landlord. The tenant will have the premises free and interference by the landlord or anyone claiming better right to the premises. So quiet enjoyment means basically I have title, I own the property, I'm going to make sure that you can enjoy the property. But this quiet enjoyment is subject to mortgage. And what we do when we sign a mortgage on a commercial piece of real estate, being apartments and everything, if we lose the property as the investor to the mortgage company could come in and take over the landlord position. Tenants pay their rent to the mortgage company, but quiet enjoyment should not be disturbed. They should still be able to live there. They should be able to enjoy the apartment, use the apartment like they've been doing all the time. Just the address will change where they have to pay their rent. The other thing is, obviously, there's a hiccup, too, if the management changes. They're going to see that and feel that. Other question? Do you have a question or anything? Okay. Covenant to deliver possession. This was another thing to note about. Landlord promises to deliver the right of possession to the tenant at the time the lease is scheduled to start. Do we put in a lease? Sure. Typically in residential, the day we give a key to somebody is the day we've given them possession. We've invited them to move in. We've given them a key. Commercial real estate, when I give them possession, that might be entirely different than the day the rent starts because there's free rent, there's all kinds of other things that are involved in that. So we go a step further and we actually write papers to say the rent commencement date. But possession is usually the day you give somebody a key. That's our common practice. And we assume that's going to happen in any lease. Some point in time, somebody's going to be able to literally use the place.
Is that a variance between commercial and residential leases?
As far as when rent starts and when you get a key? No, because in residential leases, very often now, if it's a big owner's market, tight tenant market, it's really easy to get 1 month's free rent when you sign a lease. And so in residential, they were given 1 month's free rent for people signing a lease when they're overdeveloped in overdeveloped places. So it's common to give them a key, but not collect the rent till the next month when you're doing that. In commercial, we give them time to build out space. So we give them possession while they're building space out.
Now, there was another one of the questions that we answered in chapter 7 that talked about, maybe it's one of the cases I read, where it talked about at the end of the lease, where the tenant needs to stay a little bit longer to return the space. And the question was he still a tenant in tenancy?
Tenants at will or tenants in or at that point they become a holdover tenant. They're a tenant at sufferance. They're a tenant holdover tenant. In residential, we become holdover tenants very often just by not renewing our lease. And the landlord expects that, actually anticipates that. They'll come call on you. Okay, in residential, they should be calling on you 90 to 60 days before your lease expires to say, you want to sign a new lease? By signing a new lease, you're going to be guaranteed you can stay here for another year, and the rent won't increase other than what we want to do, our annual increase or whatever it is right now, but you're guaranteed you're going to stay there for that year. So we're trying to encourage the tenants to sign that lease for that. We don't necessarily say there's automatically a penalty for holdover of 150% rent or 125% rent. In commercial leases, we do that. We tell people if you're going to be a holdover tenant and you're holding over a month to month, we want 125% of the monthly rent. That's our inducement to get them to sign a lease. And they can be a holdover for a long time paying additional rent. I have a situation right now, Fifth Third has an ATM at one of my properties. Fifth Third lost their real estate manager that's assigned to that. Their lease expired a couple months ago. I'm charging them holdover rent because they can't get their act together to sign a new lease. Now, am I ever going to see the money? I don't know. It's piling on deeper and deeper. And every time I look at my delinquency report, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to hold my breath while I collect that or not, because the new real estate person, when they come in, they're going to see that and they're going to cross it out right away. But we've been charging. Will we get it? I don't know.
They're going to hold it, though, right?
It's a holdover. Yeah, it's written in the lease. It's a law. It's a commercial contract. Okay, when you pay before you leave. Okay, what's an ATM doing on the property? They'll come in the middle of the night and pick that sucker up. It's not like moving out, having to get all your stuff out of the premises. So they'll just come get it. So will we get it? No, maybe not. It's not that we can't. It's a storefront, we can actually lock somebody out. My maintenance manager actually showed me this little padded chain that he's got. It's an orange chain with all this kind of stuff. He said, this is if we got to lock somebody out. I said, Dylan, I haven't locked somebody out of a place in a long time. You know, there's other things you can do besides locking them out. But it's an orange chain that's padded so it doesn't damage the glass. But they actually had something like that. My maintenance guy showed me that today. Kind of chuckled because it's an old concept to lock somebody out.
So when you co-sign on a lease for somebody for a place, it's just like if you co-sign for a car.
Exactly. You co-sign on a lease, they default, they don't pay, they're coming after you.
Okay.
It's your personal guarantee. You backed up their signature with your guarantee.
Now, if you co-sign for somebody for like a year lease and then that expires, everything goes good, but then you don't, I mean, can they go in it again without your name being on it and your name's still on there?
No, at that time they would sign a new lease and you'd be
you would have
relieved.
to co-sign again.
You would not have to, if they wanted you to be co-signed, they would ask you to.
Okay.
But usually the reason for co-signing is for somebody to develop a creditor relationship.
Okay.
After somebody's been there for a year, whether their credit's bad or not, they've developed a relationship with that landlord. They've showed that landlord that they can pay their lease on time. That's why the landlord's willing to sign another year with them. If the landlord's having problems, the landlord would say, I'm sorry, I don't want to renew your lease either. Get out. I'm having to chase after you. I'm not going to get my money. I don't want to go there. So it's a chance to establish a relationship and show them that you're creditworthy, you'll pay. Okay, covenant of fitness of the premises, assurance that the premises are fit for habitation. This is what we've seen now with Houston. Regardless of whether it's fit for habitation, the tenants have to pay. And this is a personal thing, how the landlords are going to deal with it and what they're going to do. I saw some very good suggestions, and I made some comments back on some of the discussion board, about what do you do? We assume when we go in that the premises are fit for habitation. What's fit for habitation? It's clean. It doesn't have mold. Doesn't have rodents. Yeah.
Flooded.
If the heat works, the air conditioning works, you get hot water, your appliances work. But
Oh, I was gonna say something about, when you talk about habitation, there's a place over in, Blue Ash, where it's a building and they have neighbors, and they're both tenants of this building, and the neighbors, it's like they grow reptiles in there, that hatch reptiles, and they have bugs that they hatch
to feed them,
to feed and it stinks something awful over there, 'cause and they have a flower shop next door, and they can't hardly stand the heat, but they don't wanna move, and they've been to the city of Blue Ash, they've sued them, they try to do everything, they can't get them out.
because you don't know what the lease says where they're raising critters. Now, if that lease prohibited, it would be up to the landlord, and that the flower shop should be going to the landlord for protection. But the flower shop doesn't want to move. Now, if I was the flower shop, I'd be going to court saying they've made this not habitable. My customers don't want to come here. I want out of my lease, and I want the right to break my lease.
Yeah.
But they got to go to court to do that. Yeah, that would kind of suck.
So the covenant of fitness of the premises, is that related just to turning over the property?
No, the entire time you live there,
So
the
if that's
landlord's
part of the
responsible for maintaining it.
lease- If that's part of the lease and hurricane comes through and destroys the place, then.
But the Texas
isn't that
law is
breaking
written
the
different.
lease?
The Texas law is written different where it says that they have to pay the rent to keep their apartment. Again, landlord-tenant law is different state by state. So what we're talking about here for the most part pertains to Ohio. What we found though is with the flood, a lot of the landlords are saying, well, I can't make repairs if I don't get your rent. And I'm not gonna let you out of your lease because I need your rent. I need all this because those landlords also don't have flood insurance. It was a catastrophe that nobody was protected or prepared for. So there's other fair ways to deal with it. And for the most part, if you're a landlord or property owner, you have a little better money financially situation, hopefully, than your tenants, and you should be trying to help. But people have their own, they got to live with their guilty conscience or not. The implied warranty of habitability, again, warranty imposed by law on the landlord by which he or she warrants the residential property safe and sanitary. The time the tenant enters and during period of tenancy. In Ohio, if the tenant feels that this is not being done, they go to Hamilton County Court and pay their rent into escrow. They file a complaint and they pay their rent into escrow. But they have to keep their rent current. Hamilton County will pressure the property owner to make repairs. But they have to go through that process every month of paying the rent down there. Then the landlord's not allowed to say that they haven't paid their rent. Because if it goes to eviction court, the tenant's going to show up at court and he's going to say, well, my rent's current. I've been paying in escrow to get the guy to fix it. At that time, the judge is going to say to the landlord, you got to fix it. He'll issue an order. It's got to go that far.
Paying with escrow.
Mm-hmm.
So you pay through.
You're paying into the county court. They're holding the money.
You just like you got proof.
There's
that
a
you're
window
paying.
you go to.
Yeah.
They give you a written receipt. Yes.
Oh, so it's just I'm not paying my rent because he's not fixing it, but I'm paying my rent.
Right, exactly. I'm not paying my rent to him, landlord, because he didn't fix it, but I am paying my rent
To live there.
to live there. Therefore, the county will hold it. They're the protector of that, but the county will help enforce the building, health issues, things like that have to be done.
And now to make him pay.
Uh-huh. Yep, down Hamilton County Courthouse.
So he won't get the rent until he fixes it.
Exactly. He's going to be pressured by the county. They're going to come and inspect,
Right.
and he's going to have to show that they've done the work. That's the only protection tenants have, or residential tenants have in our market. That the landlord can't go back and take adverse reaction to what they're doing if they're complaining about the way the place is maintained.
Right.
It protects the tenants. I answered it. Okay. Duty repair. Absent the existence of implied warranty and habitability, the landlord has no duty to repair the premises. Okay. So absent this thing of implied warranty. Okay, in residential leases, that's there. The landlord is required to do it. Commercial leases, it's not there all the time because some of our commercial leases, the tenant's taking triple net, they're responsible for all the maintenance. Therefore, the landlord doesn't have this requirement. But in residential, it's always there. Yeah.
Too in depth, but what if you put your rent in escrow
Chapter 11.
Right. Well, the mortgage company can go back to the courts to get the money. But the courts are going to come back to the mortgage company and say, wait a minute, there's a problem. There's repair orders. There's things that need to be done to get it back habitable. They'll then push the mortgage company. Hey, you got ownership from the foreclosure from the defaulted mortgage. Now you mortgage company have to make it right to get the money. So there's always that pressure. There's always that pressure to help protect the tenant. That's the only thing tenants have in our market to help protect them with their rights. Because you don't have money.
Right.
You only have the court to help make sure you can be there. Question.
Duty to repair, does that vary state to state?
Yes. But again, in most states, in residential property, it's implied that there is going to be some habitability. But again, in Texas, because the flood, because how it is, this whole thing has come around and the news is making a light of it. It says that, yeah, now they still got to pay the rent to get to be able to keep the lease, even though they can't live there. Duty to pay taxes, absent contrary agreement, the landlord has the duty to pay property taxes. In a residential lease, we assume the landlord's going to pay taxes. We assume the property's not going to be sold at a sheriff's sale. If the property would be sold at a sheriff's sale, they're going to try to tear up everything and say none of these leases are good, nothing's happening. So there's this whole thing that we're assuming as a resident when we move in, landlord's going to protect and pay the bills, have some insurance, and make sure that things are done. Unfortunately, not all landlords are good landlords. It doesn't happen that way. Building code compliance. Most cities have adopted building codes, again, for purpose protecting public health, safety. So they're requiring and construction standards. So if the building has deficiencies, again, you go to the court and say, not only do I have health issues, but there's building code issues. My plumbing isn't working properly. That's a health issue, but it's also a building code issue. So they can try to get that enforced. Yeah.
We'll go back on stop. But our question is, the first two will happen out there in Flint, Michigan. Let's say that water crisis happened, right? That was neither a tenant's fault or the landlord's fault. So, but the landlord of some of those residential or some of those apartment complexes, they were still trying to get the rent from some of those tenants. The tenants said we're not paying it because it's an unlivable condition. We're actually getting sick from this.
Right.
So exactly who's at fault and why?
It depends upon Michigan law, like Texas law. If Michigan is law, like Texas law, the tenants would have to pay the rent to keep it. Now, if I'm the landlord, I should be, and again, this is saying, take the high road. I should be going out and getting filters and doing whatever I can to make the water as safe as I possibly can that they're pulling out of the faucets. Now, I'm not going to put a $20,000 system on an apartment building, unless it's a large apartment building. I'm not required to do that. But if I can get small filters, small devices that I can help just to make bathing water safe or something like that, I should be doing that.
That brings my next question. If you was to purchase anything due to that crisis, could you go back to the state and get some type of reimbursement?
I don't know. I don't know. I do not know. And I'm sure there are people, if you would go up to Flint, you'll find those answers. Because there's still distressed property up there. There's still plenty of distressed property up there.
Well, spinning off of that point, for the pressed properties that are now in Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico, are they becoming a market for people to invest in?
It's a good time to buy it dirt cheap. But okay, you're going to buy dirt cheap to something that can flood again and get a hurricane anytime. Okay, I know you'll go back to your island if they would rebuild because it's beautiful and you want to go back there. But you're not paying to own it other than for that week of time. And you have an alternative to go somewhere else. But if they were to come try to sell you a whole new timeshare to come back there and said, you can only come here and this is it, would you still buy it?
Probably not.
Because of the chance that it might get washed away again.
I haven't taken that issue yet, but I'm going to take that.
Yeah. So again, I don't know, it is, and that's one of the thoughts I push back on somebody's discussion board. Is this a time to go in and buy these properties for cheap? Florida's already, they still haven't totally recovered from the economic crisis from 08, 09. in some areas. That we're still having, those prices will never come back yet.
Well, going back to Texas, a few years back, we had another hurricane that ripped us up pretty good. And then after it was over with, there were a lot of investors moving into places like Mustang Island and building, tearing, because the land was very cheap.
Yeah.
It was easier just to tear it down again, finish it out, then build a new one.
But at that point in time, did they have to get flood insurance?
Yeah.
Yeah, because the flood lines will be redrawn.
Right.
And now they're going to have to get flood insurance unless they're paying cash.
But they can still have to get, well, again, their objective was to go in and buy it, sell,
Right.
okay? Because
They can buy it, fix it up, sell it, and move on.
Right.
There's always going to be buyers that'll take the risk and come.
right.
There'll always be buyers. It's always, until you've lived through a disaster like that, there's always buyers. And the ones that are good campers, good sturdy people, you can't discourage them anyway.
Yeah.
They'll stay there no matter what. The mortgage company, more than anything, makes people have flood insurance because the mortgage company wants to see that the property is protected. Cash buyers, if they're smart, they're going to buy flood insurance to protect their investments, but they don't have to.
Because they're not, because they.
It's the risk. It's the monetary risk.
It's a risk of the mortgage company, but then you want to take it on personal.
If it's cash, they don't have to insure their risk.
That's just like when you buy a car from lot. When you pay for it cash, you don't have to get
Right.
insurance. When you finance it, you have to get insurance.
Now, if they expect to get flood coverage, they're going to buy flood insurance. Flood insurance is not inexpensive.
Liability.
No, she's talking about full coverage and.
No, I'm saying like right then, before you do lot, they make you buy insurance. Like if you buy cash, you don't have to get insurance. Liability. I don't have to get any insurance.
Right, yeah, you're supposed to show proof of insurance.
You have to. I just got on this kind of
Yeah, that's
stuff
the
right
You
now.
gotta have liability.
They will. They'll get you to.
I got insurance on my car though.
All right.
I didn't have to.
Rent control. We don't live in an area that has rent control that I'm aware of. It's laws and ordinances that establish limits on increases in rent in residential housing, thus functioning as a price ceiling. You go, Who said, yeah, we do? I'm not sure that Cincinnati has rent control area like New York, Chicago. If you go to New York and Chicago and you see rent control areas, you'll see families that have lived there for generations. They don't want to ever give up their rent control apartment. So they pass it on to their kids, to their kids, to their kids.
What's rent control?
It's a ceiling on the rent price. So you could be living in a rent control apartment in Manhattan that's $500 a month because of rent control, but market rent should be $2,500 a month.
I lived in New York, and I heard a lot of cases where someone holds on to their rent control apartment, they move on, live somewhere else, and they rent out at market.
They sub-rent. Yeah. Yeah. And how they can maintain that when they're not physically there anymore, there's something that they're reading between the lines to be able to keep doing that somebody can't
Well, I
step
don't
in.
think they're allowed to do that.
Right. They've got to.
It happens all the time.
Airbnb.
Airbnb.
Does rent control reflect the landlord's right to reasonable rent?
When you buy rent control, you know you bought it. And it limits the value of the property. So there is some control, yes, and you're giving up the right to raise the rents to market. So that depresses the value of the property.
But in Ohio, we're good, right?
In Ohio, I don't know of anywhere we have rent control. I have not run into rent control in Ohio. Huh? Yeah. Yeah. It exists in other parts of the world, and just be aware of it. Lessor's remedies, eviction, obviously. The term usually associated with legal procedure by which a landlord has tenant removed from premises because tenant has breached lease agreement. When you give a 3-day notice, a lot of landlords will give a 3-day notice, and the tenant will come to them and say, well, here, take this cash or take this money and help me, I'll get caught up a little bit. And landlord will say, sure. Yeah, they go to eviction court, the judge will throw it out. Once you give that 3-day notice, do not accept anything anymore. You're done dealing with them. Give them a 3-day notice. If they want to pay, somebody put in a savings account because they're going to need to move out. Because as soon as you accept anything from them after you give them that 3-day notice, the judge will throw your case out. And a lot of landlords, new landlords in our market, learn that the hard way. After they go to court, take the day off and do everything, and then realize, well, shoot, I just got my case thrown out. And then, what did I do wrong? I was just trying to work with them and help them out. And we run into this in commercial too. Once we give them 3 days, do not accept anything else. The gates are closed. We're done. Action, yeah.
So question, if you did take someone, like go through the whole case, is that like a 3-month process? Or like, how long does the eviction process take?
It could be 30 to 60 to 90 days.
So basically, if you went through with the whole case, you could be, as a landlord, you'd be out rent for like 3 months.
Sure.
You'd just be living there for free.
Sure.
For 3 months.
And you can almost not promise they won't turn the place over in real nice condition either. So you also lost your security deposit. Yeah, it's a rough world out there. So anybody, if you're going to invest and you're going to be a landlord, go to eviction court in the county where you're owning your property. Learn how it works before you take that role.
A 3-day notice meaning they have to be out of 3 days.
No, 3-day notice means I'm giving you 3-day notice. I'm going to go to eviction.
Okay, yeah.
I'm going to take it to eviction. The eviction could take 20, 15 days to schedule to get the hearing. Yeah. Yeah, but if you own a 2-family, you don't have a property manager. No, that's what I'm talking about. I have a lot of students that want to own rental property. That's what I'm saying. Before you become a landlord, learn how it works. Learn it all the way. When you're not going to have professional managers involved. Mm-hmm. That's only if you want to pay a property manager. It's the contract. What's the contract between you, the property owner, and the property manager?
Okay, so
That's a whole different ball of wax. Please? I manage a shopping center. If I'm going to give a default notice to a tenant, I actually I might give them the first notice, but I hire an attorney. I'm done. I hire an attorney.
So you did answer. So basically, it would be the property management's responsibility to service the notices and all that.
Correct.
And then call the lawyer.
But that's written in my contract. But a lot of property owners don't pay a property manager. They do it themselves because they think they can until they've been around the block. But you also have to, property management fees are not cheap. To pay somebody, the money to collect the rent and take care of maintenance and people keep the place running is not cheap. Correct. But a lot of people think they can until they've been burnt.
I know a guy, he used to have a bunch of rental properties over in Clifton, and he's been through that eviction process tons of times where he's actually had to have the sheriff come out, like him and another couple guys.
Move them out.
Move them out, put everything on the curb.
Uh-huh. Yes. And that's what'll happen through the eviction process. They'll get a sheriff's day.
You gotta go in and empty it. Not only do you have to go to court and put them out.
Yeah, then you got to pay somebody to help physically get them the hell out. Yes. Yes. It's not pretty. It's not pretty at all. Yeah. You call the sheriff. Seriously. And you issue no trespass. Exactly. But now on commercial property, before I can call the sheriff and issue no trespass, I actually have to post no trespass signs. And I'm like, wait a minute. They should know that. But no, I got to post no trespass signs. So I've recently been doing that, and I've had them stolen too. People are stealing the damn no trespass signs.
Some eventually don't have some sort of rights. Do you know what I'm saying? Once they're in that property.
20-some years.
Yeah, 20 some years. But
In a commercial.
I'm 48 and
Springboro or Clear Creek Township, there was, a development that we were looking to build in. And the one lot that we wanted actually butted up to this old house that squatters had moved into. And they basically had, even though the development had bought all that land, was gonna demolish that, they couldn't demolish it because the squatters were in there. So long story short, and they're still there.
But they had been there for a long period of time to earn the right, like a homesteading.
So when
kind
the
of thing.
development bought that land though, they didn't know the squatters were there, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it wouldn't show on the title.
Yeah, so
No.
they go into, bulldoze this old crappy little house and there's people living there and they're still living there.
Yeah. So are they building around them or it's the
Yeah,
whole
they built
development?
around it,
Yeah.
like I said, the lot that we wanted was up and I was like, okay, we'll go,
We're done with this.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to this eviction. So let's say that I'm on the flip side, I'm actually the tenant being evicted. Once we go through that process, is that gonna end up like on my record? Probably people won't want to rent from you in the future.
Yeah.
But if it's on a record, is that like?
Credit report.
It's on your credit report.
7 years, right? Yes.
Find your credit report. And okay, as a resident, you're not going to give that landlord as your reference.
No.
But if I'm a good investigative new landlord, I'm going to find out where you've been living, and I'm going to make some phone calls to find out what you were doing. There's all kinds of ways around this. All kinds of
But
ways.
you gotta get like,
Huh?
you gotta go through court and get evicted for it to show up.
On credit? Well, just by being late, a landlord can file credit. Can do a credit report. Okay. Mitigation, let's see, action for rent or damages. Landlord may permit or be required to permit the wrongdoing tenant to retain possession of the property and seek money damages for landlord's injuries. They can do that if they don't want to evict them. Mitigation damages vacates the premises without justification and the intent no longer performing out of terms of lease. Mitigation of damages. The judge will come back to the landlord and say, what have you done to mitigate your damages? And you go, what? And they say, what have you done to make your harm less? What have you done to try to re-let the place? Okay, the tenant went out 6 months in a lease. They still have 6 more months. You've evicted them. Can you assume you're going to be able to collect 6 more months of rent out of them? You can have a lawsuit against them to try to do that. Hey, you signed a contract. You're committed to that contract, whether it's residential, commercial lease. You're committed to that contract for a year. You signed it. 6 months out, you want to leave? The landlord says, I want to come back after you for another 6 months rent. The first thing the judge is going to ask the landlord is, what have you done to mitigate your damages? What have you done to try to find a replacement tenant? Whether it's commercial or residential. They expect you to be a big boy and take care of yourself and try to cure the problem. So mitigation damage is the landlord property owner requirement to try to stop their damage, try to stop the bleeding. Yeah. Okay. Duty repair, tenant's obligation to use the premise in reasonable fashion, deliver possession at the end of the lease in about the same condition as one received, reasonable wear and tear excluded. This is why you do a move in, move out checklist so that you can document what the place looked like. Today, everybody has a camera phone. You can go through and take pictures. You can create an MP4 file that you can have. There's no reason not to at least have a document that says this is the condition when we moved in. Everybody signs it. The day they go to move out, you pull out that same piece of paperwork a year or two later, and you walk through the same piece of paperwork so you can document everything. As a landlord, you can use that piece of paper when you withhold security deposit. It protects you. You're able to take that same exact piece of paper, write notes on it, say these are the estimates for the repairs for the damage we found. You can send it back to the tenant within 30 days to say this is why I'm withholding this amount of money to take care of these damages. It's all right there. It doesn't have to be a pretty letter or anything. It can be this form that you've done, and then you can send it back out. You have to do it within 30 days. In Ohio and Hamilton County, if you don't return security deposit or that letter within 30 days, tenant's entitled to double security deposit. Yes. Yes. If the landlord doesn't give the tenant their reason why they're withholding security deposit within 30 days after they leave, the tenant's entitled to double security deposit. The tenant also has to leave a forwarding address, which I found out the hard way. So on my move-in, move-out checklist, I put a whole little block for the tenant to handwrite their forwarding address. So I never had that problem again, because I found out the hard way. Because I got sued, and we had to stop it one time. What was your question, Nick?
So they would have to, the tenant would then have to sue the landlord to get double.
Correct. The tenant's going to come back and file a complaint with court to get double. Yeah.
So, what's the biggest?
Well, what happened to me is I had a gal that lived in Marymount, nice little building there. She left, and we did the move-out checklist and everything, but she went to Columbus. She went to work for the Limited. I didn't know where she went in Columbus. She didn't give me a forwarding address. I called the Limited one day. At that time, the Limited had about 30,000 employees. They said, you're looking for who? We don't know who this person is. So I had no way of finding her. 33 days later, I got a note from her prenatal attorney boyfriend. He was, a paralegal. we joked in the office, he was the prenatal attorney. We got a note from her boyfriend and her that said she was entitled to double security deposit. So I had to go hire an attorney for the trust and find out what was the law and how do we avoid this from happening in the future. What we found out is that she didn't give us official notice to where she moved to, so I didn't owe her the money. But I also, like I said, that's where I put it on my move-in, move-out checklist. I put the forwarding address, and I would stand there and make people write it down afterward. I learned. So I didn't have to go through that again.
So did you pay her regular security deposit?
She just got her security. Well, she was due a letter. She caused some damages. We just had to. I didn't have a way to deliver to her. I couldn't find her. No forwarding address. So we get that now. Duty to insure. Tenant's failure to insure may result in continuing obligation to pay rent without enjoying the benefit of the property. Okay, that doesn't fall in residential. That's commercial. Where in commercial lease, we require the tenant to carry insurance for the plate glass, the doors. The landlord covers the structure, but the tenant has to do plate glass and doors, and they have to insure their personal property in the space. One of the things we like to do in residential real estate is have tenants give us a proof of renter's insurance. If you're a smart landlord, property owner, you're doing that every time you do a residential lease. You want to see proof of renter's insurance. It's not a whole lot of money, but it also means that a tornado is typically covered on a catastrophe. Place got blown away, the tenant has a way to at least recover their personal property. It's not like a flood or a fire. The tenant has a way to get some of their personal property recouped. You as a landlord don't owe the tenant anything when there's a problem that happened, a catastrophe, fire, tornado, whatever at the property. You're only responsible for taking care of the building as a landlord property owner. Your job is to put a tarp over it, to make sure it doesn't leak anymore, to do whatever you can to protect the property from further damage, but you owe the tenant absolutely nothing. So the landlord doesn't owe the tenant anything when there's a catastrophe. The landlord just is taking care of their building. So that's why you want the tenant to have renter's insurance. So the tenant, when the tenant comes to you and says, "But you owe me this," you say, "I'm sorry, I don't owe you anything, but you did have renter's insurance, didn't you?"
So if it's like another tenant who's like breaking into people's apartments, stealing, something like that, that would still be have to cover it.
Those are different things that are covered in renter's insurance. Different policies, yes.
But that's not something the landlord.
Landlord's not responsible for that. Now, tenant breaks into the apartment, does damage to the door or the glass or whatever, the landlord's going to fix that, but they're not going to take care of the stuff that got stolen. Sorry, not their problem. Not their problem. You're putting a lot of burden on a landlord, and that's not the property ownership piece of it.
Right.
Yeah, we want to blame the landlord for everything. It doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. For trade fixtures, any personal property permanently affixed to realty by tenant, they become the property of the landlord at the termination of the lease. No. It'll say in the lease whether it will become permanent property or not. Trade fixtures. Trade fixtures in Ohio are the property of the tenant unless it's written in the lease that says it's going to stay part of the lease, part of the premises. It'll specifically say that. Most of the time, we don't want that stuff. Most of the time, as a landlord, we want it gone. Because it's stuff we're going to have to clear out for the next tenant anyway. Wrongful eviction. Act that occurs when a landlord without justification deprives tenant of possession of the premises. So, again, this whole thing about paying your rent into escrow, that helps protect the tenant against a wrongful eviction. Constructive eviction. An occurrence that results when the action of the landlord so materially interfere with the tenant's enjoyment is to make the premises untenable, the tenant can claim they have constructive eviction. In other words, you made this so bad I can't even live here. I'm calling constructive eviction. I'm leaving because you made it impossible for me to stay. And I'm going to come back and sue you now for damages.
You can do that?
Yes, you can. But you better have damn good reason. Damages, reformation, rescission, action by a tenant may bring where an implied warranty of habitability exists. Landlord has failed to maintain the premises in tenable condition. Again, same thing as constructive type eviction. Rent withholding. Practice allowed in some states under limited circumstances in which a tenant withholds rent as an inducement to force landlord to perform repairs. In Ohio, that's called payment in escrow. You are withholding the rent from the landlord, but you're paying it in escrow to the county. They're sitting on the money. You're good for the money. You've paid it. The county will back you up. But if you just say, hey, I'm not paying the rent because this place it's bad. I can't live here. And I quit paying the rent, landlord's going to evict you. You didn't pay the rent. By paying into escrow into the county, you've been protected.
Professor, I was gonna ask you about the scenario again, like if you have a tenant who's stealing from other tenants at an apartment complex, would you just call the police like you would if it was your house?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't notify the landlord first, and let them try to resolve it? No.
I would call the police. The police are going to inform the landlord that they have a tenant of dubious character. And then the landlord may have something in the lease that says that they can evict them right away because they're not following the rules. Sublease. Transfer part of the leasehold interest to the tenant with the tenant retaining a reversionary interest. So the tenant retains a reversionary interest means this: you've got a landlord up here, you have the tenant, and then you have a subtenant. This thing you're talking about, this rent control stuff. They're saying, I'm going to keep maintaining the apartment, but I'm going to sublease it to somebody else and let them live there and pay a higher rent. Okay. Almost every lease I've ever seen that allows subletting says, okay, if there's a profit made, 50% of the profit comes back to the landlord and then 50% goes to the tenant. We actually do have that in commercial leases where they can sublease. But if they make more money than what they're paying, we get part of the profit. And that's when there's long-term leases. Typically, in a residential lease in Ohio, they're typically just one-year leases. So we don't have that long-term piece.
Can you explain that one more time?
What?
What you just said. So you telling me like if I own this property and I rented it to her, and I was paying $600, and I make her pay $800, I would have to give you $100. Okay.
I'll allow the subtenancy, but if you make a profit, I get 50% of the profits. In a lot of residential leases, they don't allow subtenancy, period. If you're going to get out of it, they want you gone.
Like a roommate.
No, roommate is very different. Subtenancy means you literally physically step away and you let somebody else live there.
So
In your
like,
place.
for instance, like if you were in college and you took an internship for the summer in California, but you wanted to come back to your apartment, you might want to sublease it so that you're not paying double rent in Cincinnati, California.
So it's like changing the name.
And also so that apartment would still be yours when you came back.
Right.
The idea behind a sublet is that you never gave up possession.
Right.
It's still yours. That's what the reversionary. Whenever you see the word reversionary, that's going back to somebody, whether it's the property owner. Any lease always reverts back to the property owner.
So
But when you have a sublease, it reverts back to the sub-landlord, subtenant, back to the sub-landlord.
like a contract.
Not really, but you're drawing a whole lot more into that.
Sharing it.
Yeah.
Unless a lease explicitly states that the subletter is the maintenance responsible as part of the contract. You said that one at the 60-day rule. Subletter has to be contract, roommate has to be contract.
The 60-day rule?
30 days.
30 day. Yeah, I mean, because in Ohio, once your lease expires, you become a month-to-month holdover. So that's 30 days notice by either party. But that the roommate thing in college leases, we very much, landlords are stupid if they don't allow people to be substituted on a lease because they'll never collect their rents. So they allow roommates to move in, move out, take people off the lease, put people on the lease. And they're subject to whatever the lease is at the time they come in. Yeah.
In the country, said that, when there's subletting, you get a percentage of the actual
Profit.
Do you have like a monthly basis, would that like show you the receipt? Yeah, how does
Yeah.
that work?
Yeah, we find out what that they're subletting. In a commercial lease, very often you'll ask for the actual piece of paper, the sublease document itself that allows the sublease. Now, I have a sublease right now in Frankfurt between a hair place. You know, the main hair cutting place signed a lease, they sublet to a franchisee. But guess what? The franchisee never signed the master lease. Just the big hair company. So now the franchisee wants to close. So I'm going to go back to the hair company and say, you, by the way, you better find another tenant. You're going to keep paying me the rent. I'm going to find out that answer for sure tomorrow after I talk to my boss. But that's how I'm reading it right now.
So in that instance, the haircutting place is paying the main,
Up to this point, the tenant, their franchisees always paid the rent. But their franchisee wants out right now.
so then
And there's a sublease, but the landlord never signed the sublease. The landlord is not party to it. The master lease is between the landlord and the haircut company. The sublease is another document between the haircut company and their franchise company.
So when they break the sublease, do you get a portion of that?
It was at the actual straight fee. There was no profit. It was the straight fee, just passed straight through.
Okay, so because they broke the lease, it was just revert back and go back.
Well, I want to go back after the haircutting company to say, you find a subtenant, you pay the rent until you get another franchisee to operate in here. Is how I read it.
Subletting contract, there is no, you know how when you sign your lease in an apartment, like you break that lease, they want the rest of the rent.
Yeah.
They want that, and that doesn't apply to a sublet on a commercial.
Well, we're not a party. The landlord is not a party to the sublet. The sublet is between the franchise company and the franchisee.
Right.
The lease itself is between the landlord.
You're getting a percentage of the amount that the subletter is paying the original.
If there was profit, this was a straight pass through.
It was the same amount.
It's the same exact amount. There's no profit involved at all. It's just giving the franchisee the ability to use the premises. Yeah.
On that contract,
Uh-huh.
and they failed on that, you would be getting 50% of the bill price.
Well, in this instance, the landlord is not party to the sublet, and the landlord didn't sign the sublet. So that's what I'm looking for to see where the approval happened, to see the change. But yes, typically we would ask for that. No, once the subtenant breaks the lease, they've broken the lease, we're going to go back to the landlord and say, okay, sorry, there's no profit for anybody, but you still got to pay the base rent.
Wouldn't that be a part of the sublet contract?
That's their business. Again, I'm not part of that contract. Yeah, I'm not part of that contract. And you know, the sublet tries to say that if the subtenant breaks the lease, they're responsible for all financial problems. But they're responsible to the sublandlord for all financial problems, not to me. I'm not party to it.
As a landlord, can you prevent your tenant from subleasing the apartment? Like, you don't want.
Yes, you can have no sublease provisions. Absolutely. And most of the time in residential leases, there's no sublease allowed. They would just assume you give a 30-day notice, get out of the lease, do whatever, and sign the new tenant on direct. And in a commercial lease, if there's, let's say the old tenant was at a low rent, and my market rent has jumped dramatically, I'm not going to allow sublease. I want the old tenant out of the picture. I want the new tenant at the higher rent anyway. I'd rather deal with the new tenant direct on. The sublease has a negative connotation for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of confusion that happens in the middle of it. Huh? Well, it's the sublandlord, the primary landlord. Who's responsible for this? Who's responsible for that? There's just too much of that going, finger pointing back and forth. It's easier just to do direct leases one-on-one. Assignment, transfer in which the tenant gives the entire interest of the leasehold estate without retaining reversionary interest. Okay, this means that the first tenant can totally walk away. Most of our leases, we never have true assignments anyway, because we don't allow the original tenant to totally walk away. If the original tenant has any financial net worth, they're still part of the lease. So we never really truly did an assignment. And a true assignment means that the tenant can literally walk away. It's actually like they just passed the lease right to the landlord. And the original tenant is gone, totally out of the picture. We don't see true assignments very often. They like to say it's an assignment. It really is not an assignment.
But it's like in the middle of your lease, you find somebody to fill your apartment, right? Or house or whatever.
Yeah, but you've walked away, and now the relationship is directly between your new replacement tenant and your landlord. You're no longer in the middle of that.
They don't have to pay a security deposit. They just pick up where you left off.
And the landlord is going to keep your security deposit. Yes.
Also, the security deposit will go to them when they leave, or will they over?
They just keep
It could, or the landlord could charge it as the fee for allowing the sublet or allowing the assignment. Yes, the landlord very often might charge it as the fee for allowing the assignment. My commercial leases have assignment fees. We make them pay for a legal review, pay for extra fees to allow assignment. Sale of the leased premises. Landlord is free to convey the leased premises. The buyer takes subject to the leases in place. So my student here a few years ago bought a 2-family up in the west side of town. He was so excited he was going to kick that guy out of there and he was going to do all this remodeling and everything. I said, stop, wait a minute. You bought an apartment building with a lease in place. You can't do anything to that tenant except honor his lease. You better go learn what his lease really says before you make all these assumptions about how you can get rid of him and what you can do to the building. You bought him and you owe him the lease, hold interest, all the rights of that lease. Now you're the new owner. You got to guarantee all that.
So when their lease is over, do you have the right to not renew the lease?
Yes. At that point in time, if he wanted to remodel the building, do all kinds of things, yeah, he could just say, hey, the lease is up in 3 months, you're out of here.
So I have a question about that, actually. So with fair housing laws, and you offer renewal to one person to pay their rent on time every month, and this person, you have like a different issue with them, could they take out like fair housing, could they call fair housing?
It depends on how you treated and what you did. You need to be doing the same thing with every tenant.
Right.
Now, if they weren't paying on time, they were late pay constantly, you're having to hound them for their rent, you didn't want to renew their lease, they can't come back to you for fair housing. You're going to come back to them and say, man, you just weren't a good tenant. You weren't paying on time. This is an economic reason I'm getting rid of you, not another reason.
Okay, so you just have to prove.
Yes. Yeah, you come up with another reason. If there's a reason to treat them differently, you need to know what that reason is and how you're doing it. It's not anything to do with fair housing. It's purely economic. Anytime you're bringing a tenant in the door and you look at their credit worthiness, you don't care what color they are. You've never seen them. You're looking at numbers on a piece of paper. There's nothing to do with fair housing. It's purely the numbers on the piece of paper. Is this person capable of paying rent? Period. No other decision. Tort liability. In general, person whose possession and control of the premises owes a civil duty to third parties to maintain premises in a reasonably safe condition. So my little lady that I couldn't clean the apartment, we couldn't spray for bugs and everything because she made it such a mess. Nice little young lady in Glendale, but the apartment was so bad, she kept it so bad we couldn't spray. Every time we'd spray, all the apartments around her, the bugs would come back in another week. So I finally went with my bug sprayer one day and realized why you couldn't spray. We finally just said, sorry, we don't want to renew your lease either because you're not keeping it reasonably clean. She had been there longer than a year. We just said, sorry, we don't want you anymore. No. Roaches? They're roaches. Yeah, no, at that time, they were roaches. They were roaches. Measure of damages. Because the duty of the landlord to perform repairs grows out of contractual understanding for the lease or the law-imposed contractual theory of warrant and habitability, the measure of damages owed is the cost of repair. However, there's a trend to permit recovery for personal injury and property damages as well. So when we do security deposits and we withhold money on a security deposit, it's purely the damage replacement cost. And we put that. to replace this door was $120. To do this was this, or this. And that's why you use that move in, move out checklist. But this other piece, measure of damages, when recovery for personal injury, people get injured on the property. They're seeking more money as well as property damages. That's what insurance is about. That's why we have insurance. We let them take care of it. Exculpatory clauses. A lease clause that seeks to excuse landlord from liability for negligence in maintaining the leasehold premises. Okay, that doesn't happen in residential. There's no exculpatory provision allowed in residential. This would be a commercial type property. You'll never see that clause in a residential lease. That's it for leases. Any questions?
Just